The girl discovered that the stray cat always carried a strange object with him. The truth that followed surprised everyone. "Grandma, look what was inside Chester's locket. It's not a person," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe and confusion. Eleanor leaned closer, peering at the tiny photo inside the tarnished silver, her breath catching. "Oh my goodness, midnight. I'd almost forgotten. That was Howard Abernathy's secret friend." Why did a lonely old man hide his love for a cat he supposedly disliked? How did a stray ginger cat become the keeper of his heartbreaking secret? Subscribe, like, and listen now to uncover the full, touching story. It wasn't the glint of metal against the scruffy ginger fur that first caught Sarah's eye. It was the consistency. Every single day since she'd arrived at her grandmother Eleanor's house in the sleepy town of Harmony Creek, the stray cat had it. Sometimes dangling precariously from a frayed piece of twine knotted loosely around its neck, other times held with almost reverent care in its mouth, a small tarnished silver object, a locket. Why would a stray cat, a creature concerned only with its next meal and evading perceived threats, be burdened with such a distinctly human keepsake? It made no sense. Sarah watched from the porch swing, iced tea forgotten in her hand, as the ginger tomcat meticulously cleaned its paws near the wilting rose bushes, the locket momentarily resting on the grass beside it, like a misplaced jewel. He was a typical stray in every other way. Lean, wary, one ear slightly notched. Yet this persistent attachment to the locket set him apart, shrouded him in an air of quiet mystery that felt strangely profound. Eleanor, her grandmother, merely shrugged when Sarah pointed it out. "Just another stray, dear. Probably picked up some trinket from the trash." But Sarah knew trash didn't look like this. This object felt intentional. Significant. The cat, seemingly finished with its grooming, nudged the locket with its nose, then picked it up gently in its teeth and melted back into the overgrown hedges bordering the property next door, the long-abandoned home of old Mr. Abernathy. A shiver unexpected on the warm summer afternoon traced its way down Sarah's spine. What was the story here? Why this cat, this object, and this persistent, silent devotion? The question lodged itself in her mind, a puzzle demanding to be solved, its edges hinting at something far deeper than a cat's peculiar habit. Sarah had envisioned her summer visit to Harmony Creek as a peaceful escape from the city bustle. Long afternoons reading on her grandmother Eleanor's shaded porch, helping with the garden, perhaps exploring the quaint main street. Harmony Creek was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, where life flowed at a gentler pace, measured by the changing seasons and the chime of the old courthouse clock. Eleanor Peterson. Her grandmother was a fixture in the community. Pragmatic kind, her days filled with gardening book club meetings and the comfortable rhythm of small-town life. She welcomed Sarah with open arms, happy for the company, in the rambling Victorian house that held so many family memories. Within days, however, Sarah's attention was captured by the ginger stray. He wasn't aggressive, just intensely private, appearing and disappearing like a phantom in the periphery of Eleanor's well-tended garden. Sarah, an animal lover by nature, initially just felt the usual pang of sympathy for a creature living on the edges. She started leaving out small bowls of water near the back steps, then scraps of leftover chicken gestures the cat eventually cautiously began to accept. It was during these tentative encounters that she noticed the locket more closely. It was definitely silver, though heavily tarnished, darkening the intricate floral etching on its surface. It was small, oval-shaped, perhaps an inch long, and looked old, possibly Victorian or Edwardian. The makeshift collar, a frayed piece of brown twine, seemed entirely incongruous, something the cat might have tangled with, yet he never seemed distressed by it. When the twine wasn't visible, he carried the locket itself, holding it near the hinge, careful not to scratch it further with his teeth. He moved with it, slept near it, groomed around it. It was less an accessory, more an extension of himself. His name is Chester, Sarah decided one afternoon watching him lap water from the bowl she'd filled. The name felt sturdy, unassuming, a contrast to the mystery he carried. Eleanor, noticing Sarah's growing preoccupation, offered what little she knew. He showed up maybe a year ago, thin as a rail, just after old Mr. Abernathy passed away next door. She gestured with her trowel towards the slightly dilapidated house visible through the hedge. Poor man lived alone for years after his wife died. Kept to himself, mostly. Did Mr. Abernathy have cats? Sarah asked the question, forming naturally. Eleanor paused, leaning on her trowel handle. That's the odd thing. Howard Abernathy never cared much for animals, especially not cats. Complained about them digging in his flower beds all the time. Used to shoo them away quite fiercely. This piece of information didn't fit. A cat appearing right after the death of a man who disliked cats. A cat carrying a locket, an object implying sentiment and connection. It felt like a contradiction, a knot in the smooth thread of logic. Sarah looked over at Chester, who was now watching her with intelligent amber eyes, the tarnished locket nestled against his fur. Curiosity solidified into determination. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just a random occurrence. There was a story here tangled up in the life of a lonely old man, the appearance of a stray cat, and the silent weight of a silver locket. The inciting incident wasn't a single dramatic event, but this quiet internal resolve Sarah decided she had to understand. She had to uncover the truth behind Chester and his strange, constant companion. Sarah's investigation began subtly. Understanding that Chester was still fundamentally astray, wary of direct human intervention, she focused on building trust and gathering information indirectly. She established a routine, putting out fresh food and water at the same time each morning and evening, speaking softly to him from a distance, never pushing for contact. Slowly, Chester's gingjai lessened. He'd still keep a watchful distance, but he no longer bolted at the sound of the back door opening. He'd sometimes even linger after eating, observing Sarah with those intelligent amber eyes. Getting a closer look at the locket remained challenging. Chester guarded it instinctively. If Sarah moved too close while he ate, he'd snatch the locket if it wasn't around his neck and retreat. The tarnished surface obscured any initials or engravings that might offer a clue. She could see the floral pattern, but little else. It felt frustratingly close, yet unattainable. She turned her attention to the neighbors, hoping for fragments of information about Mr. Abernathy or the locket itself. She started with Mrs. Gable down the street, known for her sharp eyes and encyclopedic knowledge of neighborhood happenings. Chester. Oh yes, the ginger one. Mrs. Gable confirmed, pruning her prize-winning roses. A sweet thing really, though skittish. Appeared last summer right after poor Howard Abernathy passed. Sad business, that. He got so solitary after Martha died. Did you ever see him with that locket he carries? Sarah ventured. Mrs. Gable squinted. A locket, can't say I have. Mind you, my eyesight isn't what it used to be, but you say he carries it. She sounded intrigued but couldn't offer more. Next, Sarah tried Mr. Henderson, who lived across the street and had occasionally helped Mr. Abernathy with yard work. He remembered Chester appearing, but echoed the sentiment about Abernathy's dislike for cats. Howard was always chasing them off, he recalled, shaking his head. Said they ruined his begonias. Seemed almost allergic the way he carried on. Never saw him show an ounce of affection to any animal, not after his dog passed years before Martha. This deepened the contradiction. Complication 1. Why would this specific cat appear and linger near the home of a known cat disliker? Sarah spent hours observing Chester's habits. He rarely strayed far from the vicinity of Eleanor's garden and the overgrown yard of the Abernathy house. He seemed particularly drawn to the dilapidated back porch of the empty house, sometimes sitting there for long stretches, the locket resting beside him. Was there something specific connecting him to that property? She considered the possibility that the locket didn't belong to Abernathy at all. Maybe it was lost by someone else visiting the neighborhood, perhaps a child playing or even someone visiting Abernathy before he died. Complication 2. She discreetly asked Eleanor and some of the neighbors if anyone had reported losing a silver locket in the past year. No one had. It seemed increasingly tied specifically to Chester, and by extension, to the time around Abernathy's death. Complication 3. The locket itself remained stubbornly enigmatic. One afternoon, Chester dozed in a patch of sun near the porch steps, the locket lying loose beside him. Sarah crept closer than ever before, heart pounding. She could almost reach it, but just as her fingers neared Chester's eyes snapped open. He didn't run, but he fixed her with an intense stare, a low rumble starting in his chest. He deliberately nudged the locket with his nose, then stood up and moved just out of reach. The message was clear: look, but don't touch. Getting close enough to examine it properly, let alone open it, seemed impossible. Days turned into weeks. Sarah felt like she was circling a secret hidden in plain sight. The kindly grandmother, the quiet town, the wary stray, the deceased neighbor who disliked cats, and the ever-present tarnished silver locket. The pieces didn't fit. The tension wasn't one of overt danger, but of a persistent, gentle mystery that tugged at Sarah's heart, a growing conviction that understanding Chester's locket meant understanding something important, and perhaps poignant, about the hidden life of Howard Abernathy. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, born not of clever deduction, but of patience and a moment of shared vulnerability. A sudden summer thunderstorm rolled through Harmony Creek one late afternoon, unleashing sheets of rain and booming thunder. Sarah, watching from the kitchen window, saw Chester huddled miserably under the dense foliage of a rhododendron bush near the back fence, soaked and shivering, the locket clutched tightly in his mouth. Impulsively, Sarah opened the back door and softly called his name. She didn't expect him to respond, but the combination of the storm's fury and perhaps weeks of her consistent, non-threatening presence made him hesitate. He looked from the inadequate shelter of the bush towards the dry back porch. Slowly, tentatively, he crept out and darted onto the covered porch, shaking water from his ginger fur. He didn't come close to Sarah, instead retreating to the far corner, but he stayed. Sarah brought out the bowl of food she'd been preparing for his dinner and placed it near him along with a saucer of milk. She sat down quietly on the top step, not looking directly at him, just sharing the shelter of the porch as the storm raged around them. Chester, after a few minutes, began to eat hungrily, the locket carefully deposited on the dry wooden floor beside the bowl. The rhythmic sound of his eating and the drumming rain created a strange sense of peace. When he finished eating, Chester didn't immediately retreat. He sat near the bowl, grooming his damp fur, occasionally glancing at Sarah. The storm was lessening now, the thunder receding into the distance. He seemed calmer, less wary than usual. The locket lay unguarded beside him. Heart pounding gently, Sarah spoke softly. "It's okay, Chester. You're safe here." She didn't move towards him, but held out her hand slowly, palm upwards, near where the locket lay. Chester watched her hand, then looked at the locket. He didn't flinch or growl. After a long moment, he gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, as if granting permission. Trembling slightly, Sarah reached out, and her fingers closed around the cool metal. It felt heavier than it looked smooth despite the tarnish. She drew it carefully towards her. Chester remained still, watching. Turning it over in her hand, she saw the delicate floral engraving more clearly. On the back, nearly obscured by time and wear, she could just make out a faint swirling initial, an A or maybe an M. The clasp was stiff, resisting her tentative pressure. She tried again, pressing gently on a tiny nub near the hinge. With a faint click, the locket sprang open. The revelation. Sarah held her breath. Inside, nestled against faded blue velvet lining, wasn't the miniature portrait of a woman or a child as she had somehow expected. It was a photograph astonishingly tiny. Its colors faded, but the image clear, a sleek, elegant black cat with striking green eyes gazing regally out from the frame. It was exquisitely done, clearly, a cherished image. Sarah stared, bewildered. A cat. Why would someone put a picture of a cat in a locket? She carefully lifted the tiny photo frame. Tucked behind it on the velvet backing was a minuscule piece of paper yellowed with age. On it, written in faded ink in a looping old-fashioned script, were just 4 words: "Midnight, my only friend." The turning point. Everything Sarah thought she knew or suspected shifted. This wasn't a lost keepsake from a grandchild. This locket belonged to Mr. Abernathy. The initial A made sense now. And it wasn't a token of human connection, but of a bond with an animal he supposedly disliked. The contradiction wasn't a contradiction at all. It was a carefully guarded secret. The focus of the mystery snapped from what the object was to the heartbreaking why. Why midnight? Why keep it a secret? And how did Chester the ginger stray become the keeper of this poignant relic? Sarah looked at Chester, who blinked slowly at her, a silent guardian of a story far sadder and more complex than she could have imagined. She knew with certainty that she couldn't rest until she understood the connection between the lonely old man, the cherished black cat named Midnight, and the ginger stray who now carried his secret. Her role shifted from curious observer to the potential keeper of Abernathy's hidden truth. Clutching the open locket, the image of the black cat stark against the faded velvet, Sarah sought out her grandmother. She found Eleanor in the living room sorting through old photographs. Sarah quietly presented the locket, showing her the picture inside. "Grandma, look what was inside Chester's locket." Eleanor adjusted her reading glasses, taking the locket from Sarah's trembling hand. She peered at the tiny photograph of the black cat. Recognition dawned slowly, followed by a wave of surprise, and then a profound sadness that softened her features. "Oh my," she breathed, sinking back into her armchair. "Midnight. I'd almost forgotten." Sarah waited, sensing this was the key. "You know this cat, Grandma?" Eleanor nodded slowly, her gaze distant, traveling back years. "Yes, dear. That was Midnight. He belonged... Well, he didn't belong to anyone, not officially. But he was Howard Abernathy's cat, his secret friend." And then, prompted by Sarah's discovery, the story unfolded. Eleanor began to speak, not just recounting facts, but painting a picture of their neighbor Howard Abernathy, a man known publicly for his gruff exterior and private sorrows. After his wife Martha passed away, Eleanor began, her voice gentle. Howard changed. He withdrew into himself. The house got quieter, the garden less tended. He pushed people away, maybe because the grief was too large to share. She explained that the locket had originally been a gift from Martha to Howard decades ago, containing her own smiling portrait. Howard had cherished it. But after Martha's death, the house fell silent, Howard's loneliness becoming a palpable thing. Then, one year, Eleanor continued, a stray black cat started hanging around his back porch. Sleek green eyes, just like that picture. Howard, who always grumbled about strays, well, he must have seen something in that cat. A fellow solitary soul, perhaps. Eleanor confessed she'd occasionally seen Howard leaving food out late at night when he thought no one was looking. He never spoke of it, never acknowledged the cat, if neighbors were near, maintaining his cat-disliking facade. But he named him Midnight. He must have loved that cat dearly, Eleanor murmured, looking at the locket again. To replace Martha's picture, it wasn't disrespect, Sarah. I think Midnight became his lifeline, his only real companion in that empty house. Someone to talk to, someone who didn't expect anything but quiet company. The pieces clicked into place for Sarah, the secrecy, the dedication hidden behind a gruff exterior. But one question remained. What happened to Midnight Grandma? Eleanor sighed, a deep, sorrowful sound. He just disappeared one day, maybe 2 years before Howard himself passed. Hit by a car, perhaps, or maybe scared off by a dog. Howard never said, but he seemed diminished after that. More withdrawn than ever, like he'd lost his last connection. Now the final part of the puzzle began to form, built from Eleanor's fragmented observations of Abernathy's last year. And Chester, Sarah prompted gently. Chester showed up just a few months before Howard died. Eleanor recalled piecing it together now, with the locket's revelation providing context. Thinner, then more skittish. I remember seeing him near Howard's back porch sometimes. Howard was very frail by then, barely left the house. She paused, considering. I wonder, perhaps Howard saw Chester, another lonely creature drawn to his house, maybe looking for the remnants of Midnight's presence. Maybe in his final days, knowing he didn't have long, Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Howard Abernathy, for his profound loneliness and perhaps wanting his secret companion Midnight to be remembered in some small way, must have entrusted the locket to the new ginger stray. Maybe he'd tied it loosely around Chester's neck or left it near the food bowl where Chester would find it. It was an act born of grief and a desperate, silent need for connection. A message in a bottle cast out by a lonely man, carried now by an unsuspecting feline messenger. There was no more mystery, only a quiet, heartbreaking truth. Sarah felt a deep wave of empathy for Howard Abernathy, a man she'd only known as a name attached to a neglected house. She understood his hidden pain, his secret affection for Midnight, and the poignant final gesture towards Chester. The tension leading to the climax wasn't about external threats, but about fully absorbing the emotional weight of this discovery. It was about understanding the layers of loneliness, grief, and unexpected connection that tied an old man, 2 cats, and a tarnished silver locket together across time. Sarah looked out the window towards the Abernathy house, then at her grandmother's face, etched with sad understanding. The final act of the story wouldn't be a confrontation, but a quiet acceptance, an honoring of the truth Chester carried. The emotional climax arrived softly, like dusk settling over Harmony Creek. Later that evening, after the story had been told and the weight of it had settled comfortably between Sarah and her grandmother, Sarah stepped out onto the back porch. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cool. Chester was there, curled up on the old wicker chair that was usually forbidden territory, seemingly sensing a shift in the atmosphere. The locket lay on the cushion beside him. Sarah approached slowly, no longer a curious investigator, but someone sharing a secret. She sat on the steps, not too close, simply watching him. Chester opened his amber eyes, regarding her calmly. There was no wariness now, just a quiet acceptance. Eleanor came out and stood in the doorway, holding the locket. She walked over to Sarah and handed it back to her. "He should keep it," Eleanor said softly. "It's his story to carry now, in a way. Howard would have he wanted Midnight remembered." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. She held the locket, the tarnished silver, warm from Eleanor's hand. She looked at Chester, then carefully, respectfully, she closed the locket with a gentle click, securing the image of Midnight back within its hidden chamber. She didn't try to put it back around Chester's neck with the makeshift twine. Instead, she simply placed it on the porch floor near him, where he always seemed to keep it when he rested. Chester watched her actions, then lowered his head and nudged the locket gently with his nose, a gesture of acknowledgement, perhaps even possession. He curled tighter on the cushion, tucking the locket partially under his paws, accepting its return without fanfare. In that quiet moment on the porch, with the scent of rain-washed earth in the air and the gentle presence of the cat who carried a secret, the story reached its peak. The questions were answered, the hidden emotions laid bare. It wasn't a climax of action, but of understanding and emotional resolution. Sarah and Eleanor fully grasped the poignant narrative woven through the locket, a tale of love loss, profound loneliness, and the unexpected ways connections form and endure, even through the silent guardianship of a stray ginger cat. The central mystery was solved, replaced by a quiet sense of wonder and empathy. The revelation about Chester and Mr. Abernathy's locket didn't cause a town-wide sensation, but it subtly shifted perspectives among those who knew. Eleanor shared the story quietly with Mrs. Gable and Mr. Henderson, who were deeply touched, their memories of the gruff Mr. Abernathy reframed by this knowledge of his hidden tenderness. They looked at Chester differently now, not just as another stray, but as a living link to a neighbor's secret heart. Sarah's relationship with Chester deepened during the rest of her summer visit. The barrier of mystery was gone, replaced by a respectful understanding. She continued to care for him, ensuring he always had food, water, and a safe place on the porch during storms. She never tried to touch the locket again, recognizing it as his particular burden and honor. Chester, in turn, seemed to accept her presence more fully, sometimes even rubbing against her legs briefly before retreating to his preferred distance. He remained independent, a creature of habit, still patrolling the edges of the Abernathy property, the locket his constant companion. His new normal was one of quiet acceptance within the neighborhood's ecosystem. People were kinder, leaving out food more often, speaking to him gently instead of shooing him away. He became a silent fixture, a furry ginger reminder of the hidden stories that exist behind closed doors and reserved exteriors. He was still a stray, but he was no longer entirely alone. He was Chester the cat, who carried the locket. For Sarah, the summer visit became more than just a peaceful retreat. It was a lesson in looking beyond surfaces, in understanding the complexities of loneliness, and in appreciating the profound connections that can exist between humans and animals. She left Harmony Creek with a deeper appreciation for her grandmother, the rhythms of small-town life, and the quiet ginger cat who had taught her about secrets and remembrance. Chester remained in Harmony Creek, a familiar sight in Eleanor's garden, or resting near the Abernathy porch, the tarnished silver locket still glinting occasionally against his fur. He was a silent guardian of Midnight's memory, and a testament to Howard Abernathy's final poignant gesture. A truth discovered by a curious girl, a truth that surprised everyone with its simple, heartbreaking beauty.